Hello everyone and welcome to Season 14, Episode 14 of the Ubuntu podcast. We're recording on a Tuesday that's very hot, and this week we're going to share our favourite Linux applications. We'll have some command line love, and that has some roguelike elements apparently, and we'll have your listener feedback. My name's Alan, and with me this week is Mark. Hello Mark.
Hello Alan.
How are you?
Sweaty.
Yeah, that's nice. And Martin, are you sweaty?
Yes, and unfortunately, the ice block I have shoved down my undercrackers is fast melting.
TMI. Let's talk about something else. What have you been up to, Martin, other than ice?
I have recently got a Maxit 14-inch IPS portable touchscreen monitor.
Is that the Amazon description of the item by any chance?
It is exactly the Amazon description. So this is it looks like a tablet, basically. It looks like an iPad. I believe that's what they're called.
All right, Grandad.
So it's a 14-inch screen, and it's got USB-C and HDMI inputs, and you can obviously connect it via those things, and it has speakers built in. And it's terrific, and I use it for plugging in random devices that I just need a screen for. I've got a little tablet stand that it sits in, and if I just plug a screen in, that's terrific. I get a screen, it's 1080p, it looks great. I mean, it's a really great picture. It looks like a high-quality laptop panel. But if you plug in one of the USB ports to the PC, it's a touchscreen with no calibration, and it's really great. And if you plug it into, a device just over USB-C, you get screen power and touch over one cable.
Nice.
So I really like this thing. It's rather funky, and it's got a superpower that I didn't think of when I bought it, but I now use all the time, because it's like a freestanding monitor. It just sits in a tablet stand like a tablet would if you've got it on the kitchen surface whilst you're cooking. I've been playing retro shoot 'em ups, and I can just pick the monitor up and put it in portrait orientation and now play vertical scrolling shoot 'em ups in the correct orientation. It's absolutely fantastic for playing retro games that need that sort of tool aspect to properly play the game on.
Huh. I used to have a device like this, and then I dropped something on it and it broke. So that wasn't a happy ending for that thing.
Oh,
but
dear.
It was similar in that I got a cheaper one that had 2 HDMI inputs, and you could power it off a USB charger. It's
Right.
really no wall wart kind of thing. It was just a USB charger. They're really handy devices for adding an extra screen to your computer if you wanted like a third display, because they fit almost anywhere. You could, wherever you could put a tablet, you can almost stick it on the wall, anywhere.
This has got VESA mounting points in the back, so you could actually mount it places. But, in a world where we start to travel again, I've got used to having multiple displays. I'm thinking I may put that in my laptop bag with me and actually travel with it as a second screen.
Can you attach it to a phone as well? If you need your phone to do something bigger for a while, it's like an extension for that.
Yes, it's fully OTG compatible, and it works with Samsung DeX and similar technologies.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. It exceeded my expectations.
Great. Right. Let's get on with the show. So we decided to compile a list this week of our most favoritist Linux applications that we use on a regular basis, that we would have difficulty getting by without on our day-to-day activities that we do on a Linux-based computer. And we wanted to avoid all the obvious ones, like the ones you're probably already thinking of. I mean, you may be thinking of some of the ones we're thinking of, but let's see. So I think I've covered that correctly, haven't I? There's no other criteria, was there?
Yeah, that's basically it. We were mostly thinking of things that you would probably run on desktop Linux or something that can display a GUI of some description.
Okay. So, Martin, do you want to start with one of yours and we'll go round robin?
Sure. My first pick is an application called Git Kraken, which, as you can probably tell from the name, it's a GUI client for Git. And it has completely revolutionized the way that I use Git, in that I can now use Git like a professional without having to decipher the absolutely impenetrable command line options that Git has available.
So was this for you, before that you used the command line and then you used this, or have you tried other Git GUIs and found this to be superior?
Correct. So I have tried other Git GUIs. I'm just trying to remember. There was one that was based on Eclipse. It wasn't like an Eclipse plugin. I think it was called Smart Git.
Mm-hmm.
And I did use that one, and all of the options were there, but the user interface wasn't particularly intuitive. And I've tried some of the open source ones, and some of them look pretty, but none of them fully expose all of the power that Git provides in an intuitive and easy accessible way, which is what Git Kraken does and why I love it. And given that I'm using Git every day, I could not live without it now.
Interesting. What about you, Mark? What's your first one?
My first one is PHP Storm.
Oh. Is this the IntelliJ people?
Yes. So in my day job, I am a PHP developer. Well, I'm a web developer, but PHP is the main language I work in. And yeah, there is an IDE from JetBrains, who make the open source IntelliJ IDE. They make a whole host of other IDEs based on IntelliJ for different applications, or for different programming languages and ecosystems. So they've got one for .NET, they've got one for PHP, they've got one for Python, and so on. And PHP Storm is the one for PHP. And the reason that it's so much better than any of the others is it's not what you get with a lot of other IDEs when you're working with PHP is you get either a Java IDE with plugins to support PHP syntax highlighting and stuff, or you get a text editor with some plugins to add some basic PHP understanding. Whereas PHP Storm feels like it's a PHP IDE written for working with PHP, and that means you get really good auto-completion, really good code navigation, and also integration with some of the common tooling like automated testing. So PHP uses an automated test system called Behat, and PHP Storm is the only thing I found where not only does it autocomplete PHP, but it also autocompletes your feature files for your automated tests based on the steps that you've got defined elsewhere, which has massively saved me so many mistakes of time spent running a test with a typo in it and all sorts of stuff like that. It is just really good.
Is it paid or free?
It's paid.
Okay.
There are, it has a trial option, and if you don't mind running the sort of bleeding edge test version, there are free options available for doing that. But yeah, it's a commercial upsell from IntelliJ essentially.
And similarly, Git Kraken is free for personal use for public Git repositories, but then there are different tiers for professional use which unlock, different features.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to go off-piste for my first one.
Uh-oh.
Google Chrome.
Well, it's a good choice.
And the reason I use Google Chrome rather than any other browser is because it's better than any other browser. And I appreciate that the freedom-loving, militants might be grumpy that I'm not using Firefox, and I get that. Or why don't you just use Chromium? And I just find the experience of Google Chrome better. The primary thing that I use it, that I find it's better at, other than rendering web pages and doing video calls, is the multiple personality support. I realize Firefox has container tabs, but it doesn't work the same way as separate profiles that you get in Chrome and Chromium. And I really like being able to have an entire window that is one profile, one persona, and then an entirely separate window, which is a completely another persona. So I can have one for personal stuff and one for work stuff and one for a brand account and one for a podcast account. And when I close that window, I know I'm not sharing any cookies or anything to do with that account. I'm keeping everything separate in a separate window, and the model of a window is a personality fits in my head.
Yeah. My wife uses Google Chrome, and the killer feature for Google Chrome is it has a fully capable PDF engine. So my wife does the accounts for Scouts, and she needs to be able to fill in PDF forms and submit them places. And the only place you can do that on the Linux desktop is using Google Chrome.
So what's your second one then, Martin?
My second one is Shotcut, which is a video editor. Now, it happens to be cross-platform and it works brilliantly on Linux. And I've used it for several years now, and it frustrates me no end at sort of the monoculture that has developed within the Linux community, where if you speak to anyone about video editors, they just say Kden Live and the conversation ends. Shotcut is fantastic. Shotcut is the reference implementation of the MLT engine, which all the open source video editors use. Dan Denedy, who is behind MLT and Shotcut, has a decade-long standing in the video composition and video editing industry. And I think more people should take a serious look at Shotcut because it's an outstanding video editor. It renders the output faster than any of the open source and some of the commercial offerings on Linux. It has hardware accelerated timeline scrubbing when the effects and transitions are enabled. It's a first class video editor. Definitely worth the look. It's absolutely fabulous in my opinion.
I do find it amusing that you call it a monoculture in terms of Linux video editors when there are just so many of them. But I get it. Most people will say Kden Live if you ask for a video editor. Speaking of editors, Mark, what's your second one?
My second one is Sound Converter.
What does that do?
Have a guess. So I have all of my music files on a server, which I've largely ripped from CD in FLAC format. So they're lossless, which means, if I'm streaming them over Plex or NB or something like that, it might want to transcode them for saving network bandwidth or latency. But I know that the original I've always got in a lossless format, so I'm not losing quality from multiple re-encodings. But what Sound Converter does is you point it at some files and you say, I want them to be in this format and I want them to be named like this. And then you say, go, and it does it. And it works really well and it supports all of the options I've ever needed. So if I need to do something like, I want to put these files on my car stereo, which only supports MP3s, then I can just take the FLACs of those songs and stick them in there and say MP3 and, I can say replace the files that you started with, or I can say put them in the same file but in the same directory with a new extension, or I can say output them somewhere completely different, or jiggle around with the file name so it looks like this. It's just one of those tools that does one thing and does it really well.
Is this a GNOME or it's a GTK app, isn't it?
I think it is. To be honest, I don't really pay that much attention.
It looks like it. The screenshots look like Adwaiter.
It's a GTK app.
Yes.
And it is fabulous. I don't use it frequently, but when I need to do that stuff, I use it.
Sweet. My second one is OBS Studio. And the reason I've put that in there is I've used all manner of screen capture applications over the years. I've used FFmpeg on the command line. I've used Record My Desktop, Kazam, Voco Screen. I've used loads. And the one that's consistently reliable, able to record a screen that you point it at, is OBS. And the bit where you can stream to YouTube is a bit of a bonus for me that it can do that as well. But the fact that I can point at a display in OBS and record my microphone and pretty sure that whatever I'm saying and whatever's on the screen will definitely be recorded to a video file that will be playable on other things is not something that I have the same confidence level for other screen recording software. So while it is primarily used, I think, by a lot of people as a streaming tool, for me, it's the screen recording thing that's the best thing of it.
I also use it for making YouTube thumbnails.
I use
it's really
LibreOffice
easy
for
to
doing
compose,
that.
stuff.
Awesome. What's your last one, Martin?
My last one is called Wavebox, and this is pitched as a super browser for work. And a bit like your point about like Chrome and multiple profiles, Wavebox basically has native integrations for all of those web-based services that we use on a daily basis to get work done. Things like the Google Apps Suite, Office 365, Zoom.
Slack, right.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like hyper-optimized to minimize the amount of memory and resources that those integrations use. You can create profiles that keep all of those together. And I spoke about using tablets recently and using a tablet to create sort of a digital divide between work and home life. Mm-hmm. Wavebox is that on my computer. I have one workspace where Wavebox runs, and that is where work happens. And at the end of the working day, I can close down Wavebox, and that is work time is over. It's a super productivity app for anything to do with any of those services, for organizing calendars, email, to-do lists, chat applications, video call things. It's super, super great. You can try it out for free and you can pay for it to unlock additional features. I've been using it for about 4 years now. I love it.
Yeah. And you won't shut up about it. It's
no,
great.
I won't.
Mark, what's your last one?
So my last one is Nextcloud.
Oh,
now, yeah. So one of the notes that we made when we were planning this segment said, pick things you use daily or very frequently that make a difference to you or your family. So this is the one that really makes a difference to my family, because one of the things that Nextcloud has is, it's a self-hosted cloud storage platform. So I've got it running on my server in my house. But what it can do from the mobile app is instant upload of photos. Now, as a relatively recent parent, we are currently taking an enormous amount of photos. So what this means is that any photos that we take are instantly backed up to our server, and about once a month, we can go through all of the photos we've taken that month and then whittle them down to the best ones and then keep them. But this is, it just works, basically. This doesn't go wrong for us. It's on both of our phones. We know that if one of us has taken a photo, it's going there and it'll be in that folder. And if we want to find it, we know where to look. It's got really good family acceptance factor.
Excellent. My final one is Visual Studio Code. And, being not a developer, this may be surprising. But I've started doing some development stuff, and I've flipped around between a number of editors. And for a long while, I've been using Sublime Text because it launches so fast. And I found it just reliable, and I would never lose any documents if I killed it or crashed or rebooted my PC. For VS Code, the thing that sold me on VS Code was the plugin system, and the fact that I can have a workspace open where I'm maintaining a Go project, and I can have all the plugins necessary to do the linting and code completion and all that kind of stuff of a Golang application. But in another window, I can have a compiler from years ago, Blitzmax, that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And it's the same editor. It's Visual Studio Code. And so keyboard shortcuts are the same. The user interface is the same. The font's the same. Everything's the same. But these plugins that enhance the usability of Visual Studio Code are tailored for whatever I'm editing at that particular time. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And at work, last week, we did a pair programming session to review a pull request, and one person opened it in Visual Studio Code, and we did a live share between three of us, and we were all scooching around inside the code and following each other and seeing, where someone was adding some code. And it was just a really pleasant experience for me to learn from another developer. And I just love it. It's now my favorite, go-to text editor for code. I love it.
Yeah. As do I. And we have one bonus app.
Yeah. And it's not really surprising because we've talked about it quite a bit in the past. It's SyncThing. We use it to synchronize the show files between us after we do the recording. But also, I think I don't know if you, Mark, use it personally, but I certainly use it personally between all our machines, and you do as well, don't you, Martin?
I do. So in years gone by, I used to have a server with NFS shares or Samba shares and things like that and connect all the laptops to them. Now, every device has adequate storage and connected to the same SyncThing shares. So all of the data is just on all of the devices.
I remember years and years ago, there was a season of this podcast where I remember there being a whole bunch of these, Dropbox alternatives like came up in the open source world, and they all work slightly differently, and we interviewed a bunch of people about them, but that must have been going on for 10 years ago now, and SyncThing is the one that's kept going and kept getting better.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love it. I have it on every system, and not every folder is synced to every system, but, because some of them have smaller footprints disk-wise, but I still synchronize stuff, and I leave the daemon running everywhere. Even on my Windows systems, I have SyncThing running to synchronize, which does present challenges when you've got file names with colons in that don't like being synchronized to Windows file systems, but you can get over that.
So it's interesting that you mention Windows there, because looking down the list, I think with the exception of Sound Converter, everything that we've picked is multi-platform. So none of these applications, with the exception of Sound Converter, are Linux specific. They just happen to be applications that also are supported on desktop Linux or Linux.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear our listeners' feedback. Maybe if you want to send in your 3 favorite applications that you couldn't live without, with a tweet-size reason for each one of them, and we'll pick some out, especially if they're different from the ones we've already read out. We'll pick some out if you give us a reason why they're important to you, and we'll maybe read them out on a future episode. And now it's time for Command Line Lurve. Now, this one, I have no idea what this is. Martin, what is this?
This is RPG Cly, and I saw this on Gaming on Linux and thought of Mark.
Oh, does it have roguelike elements?
Hey.
I believe it does.
What is this, and why would I want this?
So one of the ways you can use this is to alias the cd command. And as you then cd around your file system, each time you enter a directory, your hero that is randomly created with, XP and health battles the monsters that it finds in the directories that it enters.
So it's a bit like a text adventure, but instead of saying go north, you say CD documents.
Yes. It put me in mind of your Umzorpig, because you don't actually have to do anything. Your avatar is created for you automatically. Yes. And as you move around, these fights are all automatically orchestrated, and you see the result of the fights that happen.
I see. So you're not there like doing attacks against monsters and picking things to fight. You just go there and it says, this is a fight that happened here.
Yeah, and it says your hero dished out 11 attack points against the spider, and the spider then dodged you, and then the spider stung you, and you see a little text output, coloured, pretty, with, emoji and Unicode and stuff. It's quite
right
cool.
Up your alley then.
What happens? Is this like perpetual, like it's constantly building, or what happens when you die?
I don't know. My character hasn't died yet. It's killed plenty of monsters, and as you re-enter directories where you've previously had battles, you'll see tombstones left behind for the monsters that have been slain there.
Oh, so it's not, you can't just come out of a directory and go back in again, come out and go back in again and expect new battles. It's a new battle in each folder you go into.
Exactly so.
So if you're grinding, then you have to make a tree of folders and wander through them.
Yeah.
If you're really bored, yes.
Yeah. I wonder if you die and you re-enter the place you died before with a new hero, I wonder if there's a tombstone for your previous hero there.
I don't know. I know you can reset the whole thing. So whatever tracks all of this, you can ask it to reinitialize. And now when you go into directories, it's as if you've never been there before.
Interesting. Okay.
Link in the show notes.
RPG CLI. Yeah, check out the show notes for more information. Thanks for that. And now it's time for all your wonderful feedback, of which we had plenty. Greg emailed us to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I was introduced to Ubuntu with a Dapper Drake free CD that was handed to me. Played around with it and the newer versions until I settled with Hardy Heron as a full-time OS for my number one machine and every LTS since. I am a user. Fast forward a few years and I have a more flexible schedule. I want to contribute, but I'm not sure how. I created an account on Launchpad. Unless I learned to code, joining the Ubuntu Klingon translators team seemed the only viable option. And with that, my Klingon is rusty at best. I'm sure I'm missing something. How can one contribute without having high levels of programming experience?
This is the perennial how do I contribute to Ubuntu question.
Start a podcast.
Well, that's certainly a way, yes. So there is a page on Ubuntu Discourse called Contribute, and it lists a bunch of the ways in which you can get involved. And just to give you a sample of some of them, translating is one. Another is answering support questions on IRC or the forums or on Ask Ubuntu is another way, especially as you say, you've been running Ubuntu since 2006, in which case you've probably amassed some knowledge of how to use it, and you may be able to be one page ahead of somebody else, in which case go to somewhere like Ask Ubuntu, you can answer people's support questions. There are other ways, aren't there, Martin?
Yeah, there is a vibrant, growing community of testers and QA community contributors. So again, if you go to the Ubuntu Discourse, you will find all of the places that they organize themselves and various milestones through each release. And towards the end of each release, there are big testing and QA processes. And they've been running for at least 3 releases now. And I've noticed a marked improvement in the quality of the releases as a result of that team's endeavors.
Absolutely. Diogo Mora emailed us.
I think the problem with changing the interim release names to Alpha, Beta 1, Beta 2 would be that for any new user, it would look like these are testing releases and not stable, so there would be a drop in users and in testing for the interim release.
So this is a follow-on from the conversation we had about changing the release schedule and maybe just having LTSs and kind of rolling in between. And I don't think I was being like super prescriptive about the names of them, but yeah, there certainly would be byproducts of, rebranding the interim releases as not major milestones, but, minor milestones heading towards the next LTS. I don't know that Canonical will ever implement the changes that I have suggested, even less so now. But maybe it's something that maybe the team can mull over and consider for the future.
Yeah, there are people that have thought about something like this, and other organizations have introduced things like this, and they've used names like Technical Preview, for example, which is what, Microsoft uses. And that gives the technical crowd the hint that maybe this is for them, and, signposts it for regular users that maybe it's not for them.
Yeah, let's use some Microsoft brand names, because that'll really put the cat among the pigeons among the conspiracy theorists.
Well, people complain that Ubuntu is Microsoft's official distribution all the time. Well, let's just double down on that. Let's own that.
Diego emailed us again.
I'm 17 and got into Linux because I need a computer for work, and my dad bought an old computer from his work for me, and it had Ubuntu Mate. At first, it was annoying that I could not install so much software that was available on Windows, but as soon as I started to tinker with Linux, installing different desktop environments and trying them out, I have so little experience in Windows that when I use it, I look like a person that has never used a computer in my life. Because I'm so techie, I will research every little thing about a product, especially Linux compatibility.
Interesting. Olivier emailed us.
I like how you add some somewhat geeky bits of personal life in the podcast. I did get the knife sharpener, by the way, a few months back. About technology for kids and the household. When younger, my kids had to use Ubuntu. Well, they were mostly surfing the web anyway. With the pandemic, homeschooling and such, I bought 2 second-hand laptops last year and decided that my kids should be allowed to learn IT with mainstream systems like Windows 10. Just as I did back in the day. They should be able/allowed to share experience with friends and such without being trapped in some odd corner just because of Dad. And I think that decision was also based on previous opinions that you shared in the podcast.
Yeah, this followed on from what we were talking about, the computers that our children have. I was helping my daughter with her MacBook Air, kind of stealing it from her a little bit. And it's interesting because the vast majority of stuff she deals with is not actually the operating system at all. That's kind of, to one side. It's really the applications on top. It's, the Chrome and the Spotify and all that kind of stuff on top, which is the same everywhere anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say that I've found that, the prevalence of web apps and web services, my wife is coming to grips with the fact that when she used to work and she was an accountant, you had Microsoft Excel on your desktop. And now all of the volunteer work she does with accounts all use Office 365 or the Google suite. And she really railed against having this spreadsheet in a browser for some time. It felt very uncomfortable to her.
Not a proper spreadsheet.
Well, it had been like 10 years and suddenly it was like, what do you mean spreadsheets are in a web browser? That's rubbish.
Just press F11 and nobody will notice. It'll be full screen and you would never know there's a browser underneath it. Ian Cuthbertson left a comment on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ubuntu podcast.
Googling for Vault Warden returns results about gamesworkshop.com. I wonder if they will need to change their name again.
Oh, this is in relation to the Bitwarden RS changing their name, wasn't it?
Yes. If you search for Vault Warden as one word, as it's branded, then you do get that software. But yes, if you search for Vault Warden as 2 words, you get some Warhammer figures.
They sound like the worst people to annoy. Tobias tweeted at Ubuntu Podcast,
I built a phony box for my son. You can find Phonybox at phonybox.de. No need for servers or Wi-Fi. Everything is on the SD card. So is this something like the device that you were telling us about a couple of weeks ago, Mark?
Yes. So the one I've got is called a Yoto. There's also a competing product, which was also developed in Germany, called the Tony Box, which I think that this project was trying to emulate. So this is a Raspberry Pi based project, which I think basically you have the Pi and the software and the NFC reader and some speakers, and then it's not prescriptive about how you present that. You can put it in your own case, and it recommends like retrofitting old radios and toys and stuff like that. So it's quite a neat little idea. If you want something which is a bit more DIY, then it's quite a cool project.
Nice. And that's all of your wonderful feedback. And that's it for episode 14. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week with community news, big news, events maybe, and other stuff and goings on. If you want to email us, send an email to show@ubuntupodcast.org. And if you're looking for a VPS, we highly recommend you use Bitfolk. Go to bitfolk.com for more details.